The QWERTY keyboard. Your keyboard was not designed to help you type quickly. It was designed to stop a machine from breaking. The layout dates to the 1870s, when typewriters used physical metal hammers to strike ink onto paper. One hammer per letter, all of them mounted in a semicircle. Type too fast and hammers for adjacent letters would collide mid-swing and jam. The solution was to map the most common letter combinations onto keys that were physically far apart, forcing the hammers to travel in different directions and giving each one time to fall back before the next arrived. The keyboard you are using right now is a direct descendant of that constraint. The hammers have not existed for 50 years. The spread them apart logic that slowed typists down to protect a mechanism that no longer exists is still built into every device you own. It stayed because it was there first, everyone learned it, and the cost of retraining a planet is higher than the cost of using a slightly worse keyboard forever. That is the whole story. Everything that follows is a longer version of it. VHS versus Betamax. The year is 1977, and you are standing in a shop that sells both. The Betamax box is slightly smaller. The picture is sharper. The machine feels more solidly built. You pick up the VHS box, and it is bigger, slightly cheaper, and records for 2 hours instead of 1. You put the Betamax down. You did not know you were making a decision that would determine the format the entire world used for the next 2 decades. You thought you were deciding whether to record a football match. Sony launched Betamax in 1975 with superior picture quality and a more refined engineering approach. JVC launched VHS a year later with one deliberate advantage: longer recording time. 2 hours was enough for a feature film or a full sporting event. 1 hour was not. Sony, convinced their technical superiority would carry the argument, kept Betamax proprietary. JVC licensed VHS to any manufacturer who wanted it, and manufacturers wanted it. Within 3 years, there were dozens of VHS players on the market from a dozen different brands. There was one Betamax player, made by Sony. Then the adult film industry chose VHS. Sony had declined to license Betamax for adult content, whether by formal policy or by making the conversation difficult enough that studios went elsewhere, depends on who you ask. The practical result was the same. The highest volume rental category in the late 1970s existed almost exclusively on VHS. Video rental shops stocked what customers rented. Customers rented what shops stocked. The flywheel that was already turning in VHS's favour started turning faster, and it was carrying cargo that nobody mentioned in the press coverage, but everybody understood. Sony admitted defeat in 1988. A better product, made by better engineers, killed by a licensing decision, a 2-hour tape, and a category of content their founder apparently did not want associated with the brand. AC/DC, the War of Currents. In 1890, Thomas Edison paid for a horse to be electrocuted in public. He also paid for an elephant. He lobbied for alternating current to be used in the electric chair, on the theory that if the public associated AC with execution, they would buy DC instead. He had patents on DC equipment. He had a distribution business built around DC infrastructure. He was not going to let a superior technology replace it without a fight. The technical argument was not close. Think of electricity transmission like water pressure through a hose. Run it over a long distance and the pressure drops. You arrive at the other end with less than you started with. DC suffered from exactly this problem. A DC power station could serve customers within roughly 2 kilometres before the energy loss made it unworkable. The only solution was more power stations, closer together, everywhere. AC operated differently. Transformers could step the voltage up for long-distance travel and back down for safe use at the destination, the way a water tower stores pressure centrally and delivers it across an entire suburb from a single source. Westinghouse's AC system, running on Tesla's design, could transmit power hundreds of kilometres from a single plant. Edison's system needed a generator in every neighbourhood. The economics were not subtle, and Edison understood them perfectly well. His response was not to improve DC. It was to make AC frightening. The campaign ran for nearly a decade. Public demonstrations, lobbying, and the deliberate coinage of the word Westinghoused as a synonym for electrocution. None of it worked. By 1895, the Niagara Falls power plant was transmitting AC electricity across the region, and the argument was over. AC won because the technical gap was too large to obscure, even by someone as resourceful as Edison. But it took a decade of vicious campaigning to find that out. Edison never publicly admitted he was wrong. This is the one case study where the better technology won. It belongs here because it shows what winning actually costs when the incumbent fights. Internet Explorer versus Netscape. It is 1995 and you have just discovered the internet, not in an abstract sense, You have a phone line, a modem that makes a noise like a fax machine having a breakdown, and a copy of Netscape Navigator that someone at work told you to download. The browser loads a page in the time it takes to make a coffee, and you find this completely acceptable because you have nothing to compare it to. Netscape is fast, stable, and built by people who understood what the web was going to become before most people had visited a website. Then you buy a new computer, and it already has a browser on it. You did not ask for it. You do not particularly need to go looking for another one. You use the one that is there. Internet Explorer was not a better browser. This is not a disputed point. It was slower, less stable, and missing features Netscape had shipped years earlier. Microsoft's response to this was not to build a better browser. It was to make the question of which browser to use irrelevant. Internet Explorer was bundled with every copy of Windows, which ran on roughly 90% of personal computers. It was not pre-installed as a convenience. It was embedded into the operating system in ways designed to make removal difficult and replacement inconvenient. By 1999, Internet Explorer had over 95% of the browser market. Netscape was functionally dead. The US Department of Justice ruled the bundling anti-competitive. Microsoft was found to have violated antitrust law. The ruling came in 2000. Netscape had already been acquired for parts. The lesson the market took from this was not that antitrust law works. It was that if you control the distribution channel, the quality of the product is a secondary consideration. Blu-ray versus HD DVD. HD DVD launched first, was cheaper to manufacture, and had committed studio backing. Blu-ray had higher storage capacity. Neither of those things decided the war. Sony had spent years developing Blu-ray and needed a next-generation disc format for the PlayStation 3. The PS3 needed a drive. The two problems solved each other, and what Sony could not have fully predicted was how successful the console would turn out to be. By the holiday season of 2006, millions of PlayStation 3s were in living rooms around the world. Every one of them was also a Blu-ray player that someone had paid for without particularly meaning to. HD DVD had a format advantage, a price advantage, and a head start. Blu-ray had the installed base. When Warner Brothers announced in January 2008 that they were moving exclusively to Blu-ray, the other studios read the room. The format war ended in weeks. Toshiba discontinued HD DVD in February. Start to finish, from first player to surrender, the war lasted about 14 months. The PlayStation 3 was not a great Blu-ray player. It was loud, it ran hot, and it cost significantly more than a standalone player. It did not need to be great. It needed to exist in enough living rooms that the outcome became inevitable. Gasoline versus electric. Electric vehicles outsold petrol cars in the early 1900s. This is not a piece of trivia. In 1900, a third of all vehicles on American roads were electric. They were quieter, cleaner, and easier to operate. Starting a petrol engine required physically cranking it by hand, a process that could break your wrist if the engine kicked back, and frequently did. Electric vehicles started with a switch. For the urban drivers who made up most of the market, there was no meaningful argument for petrol. Two things ended this. Charles Kettering invented the electric starter motor in 1912, which removed the hand cranking problem. And John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil had spent the previous 2 decades doing something that had nothing to do with technology and everything to do with geography. They had put petrol stations everywhere, not some places, everywhere. The situation was like a city that has spent 30 years building roads to every suburb, but only ever paved them for one type of tyre. When a better tyre arrives, it does not matter. The roads do not fit it, there is nowhere to change it, and the people who paved the roads are not going to stop charging tolls. By the time the electric starter motor neutralised petrol's last remaining disadvantage, the distribution network for its rival did not exist and was not being built. Range anxiety is not a modern invention. It is 120 years old, and the reason it killed electric vehicles the first time was not the technology. It was the roads. The parallel to today is uncomfortable if you think about it for too long. Why the better product loses? The pattern across every one of these is the same, and it has a name: path dependency. Where you end up is determined not just by what is best, but by the sequence of decisions that got you there. Who arrived first? Who controlled the pipes? Who made it expensive to leave? There are 4 mechanisms. The first is timing. The inferior product got there first and became the standard before anyone had decided it was the standard. QWERTY is the cleanest example. VHS is the commercial one. Being first does not mean being best. It means being what everyone else has to be compatible with. The second is distribution. Internet Explorer did not win on merit. It won because it came preloaded on the machine. The PlayStation 3 did not win the format war. It relocated the war to a battlefield where Blu-ray could not lose. Control the channel and the product quality becomes a secondary argument. The third is network effects. The value of a standard comes from everyone using it. Switching to a better alternative does not just cost you the price of the new thing, it costs you compatibility with everyone who has not switched yet. This is why inferior document formats persist in offices that would benefit from something better. The cost of switching is not technical, it is social. The fourth is switching costs, retraining, incompatibility, hardware replacement, the friction of everything that has to change before you can use the better thing. Switching costs explain why industries that appear irrational are often just locked in. The rational decision for any individual is to stay put, and the sum of millions of rational individual decisions is a market that cannot move. The one exception is a player powerful enough to absorb the switching cost for everyone. In January 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and introduced a device that did not ask you to give anything up. There was no library to transfer, no accessory ecosystem to abandon, no muscle memory that no longer applied. The iPhone was not a better version of the phones that existed. It was a different category with better distribution, better timing, and a company that had spent years building the infrastructure to make entry frictionless. People did not switch to the iPhone. They started fresh. That is the only version of winning that does not require the incumbent to collapse first. The best technology does not win. The technology that makes it hardest to leave wins. Once you see it everywhere.